Daily Rambam for Friday, Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Zion, Tishrei, Tafshin, Pei Aleph, the first Perek of Hilchos, Tefillin, Mezuzah, and Sefer Torah. So after we concluded Hilchos Kriyas Shema and Hilchos Tefillin, Berachos Kohanim, so far in Sefer Ava, so now we're moving on, we're advancing to Hilchos Tefillin, Mezuzah, and Sefer Torah, which of course, what they all have in common is that they're part of the field of Safros, or the Rosh Tevis that we use, Stam. We have 10 prakim in these halachas. The first 4 are generally about Tefillin, 5 and 6 are about Mezuzah, and 7 through 10 are about a Sefer Torah. However, a lot of the details in Perek Aleph are actually sort of general and will apply to all 3, as we shall see. Let's begin with reading the lines that the Rambam writes before Perek Aleph, Halach Aleph. Hilchos Tefillin Mezuzah b'Sefer Torah. Yesh b'chlala and chamish mitzvah say v'zel pratim. So there are 5 mitzvahs here. Aleph, liyas tefillin al hareish, it should be tefillin on the head. Beis l'kashtem al hayad, they should be tied on the hand. So those are the 2 mitzvahs of tefillin, shal reish and shal yad. Gimel, l'kboya mezuzah b'pischei ha'sharim, to put a mezuzah up on the door. Daled, lichtiv kol ish, sefer Torah la'atzmai, and hey, lichtiv ha'melech sefer sheina la'atzmai. Mitzvah number 4 is that everyone should write a sefer Torah for himself. And mitzvah number 5 is that a king should write a second sefer Torah for himself. Kadei sheyiyu lo shnei sefer Torah, so he ends up with a total of 2. Ubir kol ha'mitzvah elu b'prakim elu. We're going to learn all 5 of these mitzvahs, all 3 general subjects in these prakim. Now, just to point out, Sefer Torah is the only one where the mitzvah is actually to write it. The other ones, the mitzvah is you have to use it for a certain thing, and the writing is sort of a prerequisite. You have to write it in order to use it. Whereas Sefer Torah, it's the opposite. It doesn't say what you should do with it. It's just that you should write it. And of course, we know that a lot to say about the mitzvah of writing Sefer Torah, and the Hilchos, getting into that, will be relevant to the appropriate Perek. Also, just to comment on the Lashonis of Gabi Tefillin, it says liyas tefillin al hareish and l'kashem al yad. It should be on the head. It should be tied to the hand. So it's famously noted that there's a difference in language here. Also, it's famously noted that the order is interesting. Why does the reish come here before the yad? First we tie the shal yad, then the shal reish, and Psukim mentions shal yad before shal reish. There's actually a sikha, a holikut from the Rabbi about this, and look at the sikhas chedek lamed tes v'aschan and beis, and the teichen in short is why does the Rambam in the Minyan HaMitzvahs and was tefillin here in the halachas themselves? Why does shal reish always come before shal yad, unlike the order of the pasuk? So some say, there are quotes from Achreinim who say that maybe the kedusha of the shal reish is actually greater than the kedusha of the shal yad, because you can't recycle, you can't reuse, repurpose the shal reish and turn it into shal yad. But the Rambam keeps to this order even when he talks about the order of putting it on, the order of the brachas. Why would you say the order of the order of putting on the shal reish and the bracha of shal reish before you describe what you do with the shal yad? It's literally the wrong order. So the Rebbe explains based on the Rogatchover regarding this difference between shal yad and shal reish, that the mitzvah of shal yad is actually to tie it, and the mitzvah, so it's really essentially only a mitzvah that lasts for one moment while you're tying it. And you leave it on because whenever you have the shal reish on, you need to have the shal yad on. It's like sort of a condition in the shal reish that you should keep your shal yad on. But the mitzvah essentially is only for one moment. Whereas according to the Rogatchover, the shal reish, that's a constant mitzvah. It should just be on your head. That's also what's implied by the psukim themselves. It's there in the pasuk. So the Rebbe says, what's Sefer Ava about? We quoted when we started Sefer Ava that the Rambam wrote in the Akdama to Mishnah Torah that it's the mitzvah shehin tediresh and it's tavinu that they lev samakim l'zachrei tamid. The whole idea of Sefer Ava is these are the mitzvahs that are constant, that help us love Hashem and remember Hashem at all moments. So which the tefillin fits is more in line with that? The one that's a mitzvah for one moment, or the one that's a mitzvah every moment? The one that's a mitzvah every moment fits in with the theme of l'zachrei tamid. It's a tamid. It's constant. The Rebbe gets many other additional technical details that Rebbe reels into this discussion, and the Rebbe connects it. Al pi chassidus, he says tefillin shal yad is connected to leiv, so that's midos, the emotions, and tefillin shal reish is on the reish. That's the moichin. He says a beinani can't transform his midas. So what's the mitzvah? What is it? What's the avoid of a beinani with his shal yad, with his midas? Kshira, eskafi, you have to just tie up your Yetzer Hara. You got to keep it in check. That's the mitzvah of kshira for shal yad. But your mind, you have control of your mind. You think about whatever you want. So there, the mitzvah is tamid. You can constantly be using your mayach for the right thing, as opposed to the shal yad where you have to tie it. But at the same time, you did mention that whenever you have the shalosh, you always need to have the shalyad. So in order that your mayach should be used properly, your level has to be done right. So you have to have the skafia along with the you need both. So that's how the Rebbe explains. Let's move on to the Perek itself. The Rambam begins with defining Tefillin and Halacha Aleph. Arba Parshias Elu starts right off. These 4 Parshias, Shehein, Kadesh Li, U V'Haya Kiviyacha, Shebesefer El Shmois, Ushma, U V'Hayim Shemaya. Now, why does the Rambam mention that Kadesh Li, V'Haya Kiviyacha are in Sefer Shmois? The Kesef Mishnah says that it's actually specifically V'Haya Kiviyacha that the Rambam is saying Shebesefer El Shmois, and the reason is because there's another V'Haya Kiviyacha in Sefer Dvarim. So the Rambam just wanted to, we Rambams today have Mar Mekaymis in parentheses, but you didn't have that back then. That's not how he wrote it. So just it should be clear. But of course, the 4 Parshias, so they're written on their own. Seemingly, the Rambam means in distinct. It's distinct from the rest of the Sefer Torah. Usually, you write the whole Sefer Torah. You're supposed to write the whole Torah. Here, you're writing just these Parshias, just these 4. And you cover it in leather. And Tefillin, and that's these 4 Parshias written and covered in leather. That's what we call Tefillin. And you put it on the head, you tie it to the hand. And even the kites of one letter of the 4 Parshias is ma'akev all of them. So if you get one kite, one line wrong, so even already minat Torah, midaraisa, the whole tefillin is possible. You need to write it correctly. Now the Rambam wrote kaitzei shel ois achas, so he just makes it like a general thing, a line, any line. If you look at the Gemara says kaitzei shel yud. That's also a famous expression. Kaitzei shel yud, just a little. Well, what is the kaitzei shel yud? So the Kesef Mishnah quotes that Rashi says that it's the leg of the yud, the leg we're all familiar with, the little thing sticking down on the right of the yud. And the question is, well, what's the chiddush? It's not a yud without that. You say kaitzei shel yud, it sounds like it's like an extra thing. You would think the yud would be okay without that little line. So Rabbi Tam says no. It's actually the yud also has a little tiny line going down on the left. Besides the thick one on the right, there's a little one on the left as well, and that's the kaitzei shel yud. That's interesting what he says. That's the kaitzei shel yud according to Rabbi Tam.
Is two lines above?
So there's a tag going up. There's the main part of the yud going down to the right, and there's a little line going down to the left. And that's according to Rabbi Tam. That's the kaitzei shel yud.
On the bottom?
On the bottom, on the left, yeah. Yeah, in the front. The front of the yud, there's a little line coming down. That's what Rabbi Tam says is the kaitzei shel yud. So the fiza yesh the Kesef Mishnah says the fiza yesh the yud tag l'mayla v'gam kofef l'mata. And then he says v'afshir the kaitzei shel yud haynu tag l'mayla. Why can't we say the kaitzei shel yud is the tag on the top? So whatever it is, as we said, the Rambam doesn't even say kaitzei shel yud. The Rambam just says kaitzei shel ois achas. Look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Lamed Vav. Siman Lamed Vav is where the Alter Rebbe goes through letter by letter of Safrus and says exactly how you have to write it. The Diktuk Sivas Koloisius. So there the Alter Rebbe writes regarding the letter Yud that you have to have a little tag on top, and then you need to have also that he calls it an oiketz. He doesn't use the word kaitz at all. He calls the thing on top a tag, and he calls the thing on the left and the bottom a little oiketz, and it has to be very small, otherwise it ends up looking like a small ches. You want it to not look like a ches. And
it's unbelievable. Everybody always thought kaitzei shel yud was on top of the yud.
Right. So Kesef Mishnah did say at the end that ve'afshir the kaitzei shel yud haynu tag l'mayla. He did suggest that, but interestingly, so here at least in Siman Lamed Vav he doesn't mention the word kaitz at all. He just says it has to have a tag cotton l'mayla and an oiketz cotton yed lamata. That's what he just calls it, a little oiketz. And he says that that oiketz is less ma'akev than the thing on the right. If you skip the thing on the right, then it's you never made a yud, and then you can't go back and you're writing it out of order. So if you missed that oiketz, then you can go back and fix it. That's not crucial. You need to have it, but it's not crucial to the definition of the letter. So there is a difference between the yud itself and the kaitzei shel yud, if that's what we call the kaitz. Or the tag, probably the same thing for the tag. If it's missing the tag, you can have the tag later. Okay, moving on. Now, on the last point that he made about the tefillin, that even one kaitz is ma'akev. So now the Rambam expands that in the next halacha to the mezuzah and the sefer Torah. V'chein shtei parshiyos shebem mezuzah. The same goes for the mezuzah, which contains 2 parshiyos, shein shma v'hayim shemaya. Again, even one letter missing, even if it's just missing that little line, already midaraisa, it's not a kasher mezuzah, until they're written completely. It's possible, and the same goes here. It just says Sefer Torah that's missing a letter. It doesn't mention the kite. Doesn't mention the kites. Just says missing a letter is possible. Now that itself is interesting because the Kesef Mishnah points out the din of kites shal yud. That whole line, that's only in the Gemara regarding Tefillin and Mezuzah. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Gemara regarding the Sefer Torah. The Kesef Mishnah says that Das Rabbeinu that because Tefillin and Mezuzah who are doing the Sefer Torah. He says, look in the Megillah, it says, Ein bein Sfarim with Tefillin and Mezuzahs. What's the difference? There's all the Ein beins in Megillah. There's no difference except, so there's no difference between Tefillin and Mezuzah and Sefer Torah. That Sfarim, Sefer Torah can be written in any language, which is not something we do anymore, but and Tefillin and Mezuzahs have to be Ashuris. So sounds like in every other respect, they're the same. So that would include this halacha that Eisachas. Also in Menachos, it says that the Sefer Torah that has 3 mistakes on every daf, you should fix it. If it has 4 mistakes, you should just bury the Sefer Torah. So that doesn't say if it has 3 mistakes, you could just leave it. It says 3 mistakes, you have to fix it. So it sounds like until you fix it, it's also not kosher. If there's 3, you fix it, then it's kosher. And if there's 4, then forget about it. This is the Ran actually disagrees with these rayas, but this must be the Rambam's opinion. Another raya, it says, we mentioned the other day about the last 8 psukim of the Torah. The Rambam said that the Gabi Kriyas Torah has a different halacha, that you don't need a minyan for the last 8 psukim, because even though we said that Moshe wrote them, but it sounds like Moshe didn't write them. It sounds like it's different. So the Gemara talks about it there. Someone says that Moshe didn't write them. Yeshua wrote them, and someone says in response.
If you start laning, and you have a meeting when you start, and people walk out, forget about the 8 psukim. Any place, you can continue laying the whole thing.
Right. So we have to. We're not discussing that Perek today. I mean, the Rabbi said, I don't even understand what you're talking about. Why would there not be a minyan? The Kesef says sometimes people leave. But it seems like according to Rambam, only the 8 psukim have this din. So we'll look into it again. But just the Gabi, this Gemara, the Gemara says, what? The last 8 psukim weren't written by Moshe. After Sefer Torah, Chaser Eis Achas, Chesiv L'Koyach Sefer Torah. Moshe was supposed to hold the Sefer Torah. And a Sefer Torah is not a Sefer Torah if it's missing even 1 letter. So if Moshe had a Sefer Torah that was kosher, surely it had the last 8 psukim. That's the eye of the Gemara. So again, we see Chaser Eis Achas. So it sounds like the Gemara is saying that without even 1 letter, a Sefer Torah is not a Sefer Torah. So those are the rayas for the Rambam that Sefer Torah can't even be lacking 1 letter. On the other hand, there's a Gemara that says in Gittin that Sefer Torah shechaser yiriyah achas ein kohen. If it's missing a whole yiriyah, you can't read the Sefer Torah. Sounds like, it's missing a whole yiriyah. What if it's missing just the pasuk? Sounds like it's okay. So the Rambam is going to have to tell you that no. The context there was a Megillah. In the Megillah, even if you're missing a few yiriyahs, you can say the rest bal peh. Saying Sefer Torah, even 1 yiriyah is missing. But once we say 1 yiriyah, we also mean really one letter. There's no difference between a chesar and ma'at, chesar and meruba, even 1 ois. Ultimately, according to the Rambam, it's possible. Okay, moving on to the details now of the tefillin. How do we make the tefillin? Gimel asara dvarim yesh b'tefillin. There are 10 elements, 10 important details to tefillin. Kun halach l'Moshe miSinai. It's not written clearly in the Torah, but we have it as a tradition, all the way dating back all the way to Moshe. V'chulam ha'akvin, and they're all completely necessary. You can't skip it. Since they're ma'akiv, so if you did it wrong, you changed something, those tefillin are going to be possible. 2 relate to the writing, and the other 8 relate to how you wrap the leather around it and how you tie the straps. Those 8 are all going to be in Perek Gimel. Here we're just going to focus on the first 2. These are the 2 basic things that relate to how you write tefillin. You write them with ink. Which we'll define in a moment. They should be on the parchment, the kosher parchment, as we're going to describe as well. So halacha daled. Keitzad ma'aseh hadyos. Now the Rambam is going to give us just a technical description, the process of ink making, the kosher ink making. The Rambam says like this: you collect the vapors of oil, of tar, of wax, or something like that. And that causes it to condense. And you knead it together with the sap from a tree and a drop of honey. And you get it very moist. Then you crush it until you turn it into these cakes of this substance. Then you dry it. And you store it away. And that's essentially your ink. Those cakes of these ingredients are essentially your ink. Then how do you actually use it to write? So b'shas ksiva, when it comes time to actually write, shereyu b'mei afza v'chayetzi bay v'kaisev bay. So then you soak it in gallnut juice. I'll say what that is in a moment. And then that moisture, that's the combination of the gallnut juice and these cakes of these ingredients, that moisture is the ink. What the benefit of this approach is, if you want to erase it, it erases. You don't want it to be unerasable. This is the ink that ideally you should be using. The imkas of shlashna, but may after the kalkantois. The second word, it's different places. Kantoim, these Greek words that end up being written with different variations in different places. And then my text here it says kalkantois. So if you wrote all three with me'afza, so me'afza is again the gallnut juice itself. Kalkantis is iron sulfate, some kind of mineral. And these are permanent; they don't erase, which is not ideal. Still ksher, and in this case, it would still be kosher. Now, what is gallnut juice? What is gall? So interestingly, gall, or otherwise known as cystidia, is a kind of like a growth that grows on the outside of plants or animals, sort of like a blister of some kind. It's like an abnormal growth of tissue and like a tumor, like a wart. And this is the effets afotzim, and somehow you extract the juice from that, and that's what we're talking about over here in the context of the ink for stam.
They still use it.
So now, what's the story with ink nowadays? Looking at the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Rebbe says, Allah Sinai. Going along here with the Rambam, that the right with Yesh Mishahira, and it's signed to the Rambam that it should be written with ink that's erasable. Where do we get this idea from? From Saita. Saita, it says Umacha, you have to erase the letters and learn from there. It has to be Eksav Sheyuchal Limchas. It has to be to begin with. It has to be a writing that you could erase because you're supposed to be erasing it. Gzeira Shava Ksiva from Saita to Stam. So therefore, you shouldn't put this kankantoim, which is the more standard way of saying the word. You shouldn't put this iron sulfate or whatever mineral it is into the ink, because that leaves a strong mark and it doesn't erase well. So according to that, that it should be out of this the vapor from the wood, from the oils, mixed with the gallnut juice. That way, if when you erase it, it erases, and all of this kind of vapor would be good. And olive oil is the best. And the Rebbe says, if you use the gallnut juice itself or the kankantoim, which doesn't erase, it's also kosher, because you don't really learn ksiv from Satan. And the Rebbe adds, so he's already alluding to the fact that they didn't have this whole concoction. If you look in the Aruch HaShulchan in Yerideh and Hilchos Sefer Torah, Siman Eish Ayin Aleph, he has a whole discussion. All these things are way more complex than we're letting on over here. So he's discussing the different sources on the topic, and he says there seems to be some kind of source, some kind of Kabbalah, that ideally the ink should be coming from Gedul of Mina Eitz. It should be somehow plant-based, not just any color. So that's why they wanted to use the vapors, because the vapors ultimately come from the wood. Then he says, the Magen Avraham said, later Inush Nagokain, already at the time the Magen Avraham, he didn't see anyone doing this. You look in the quotes in the Perek Yosef, the Chidah writes that Ata Seifrim Ein Kaisim Bezeh Yoshel Hashanim, Mepnei Shu Miskalkel, V'Nimchak B'Nakel, whatever attempts that were done in more recent generations, they try to follow the recipe, and whatever ink came out of that seemed to erase way too easily. It was erasing too much. So therefore, we just stick to the afatzim themselves. To use the kankantoim isn't plant-based; that's a mineral. But the afatzim at least comes from the plant. So if you stick to that, at least you have the mila that it's coming from the plant. And it goes on, discusses at greater length, but that seems to be where that halacha moved on to, and where it's standing. Now the Rambam continues and says, "Okay, and if I told you it has to be following this whole process. Then I said you can use whatever you want. So okay, what's this unique halacha l'meishem misinai over here? We said there's a special halacha you have to use diyai. So he says, it's telling us you can't use other colorful substances. Red, green. You wrote in all three. Even one letter, any color, even gold. These are all possible. So that's what the joy is really telling us, not the other stuff, even gold. Because the Mishnah says that he has a question in Gemara Shabbos. It says that if you write Hashem's name in gold, you should be going as it. So it's mashma a little bit that maybe Dafka Hashem's name, maybe all the other letters could be in gold, it would be okay. Why did I'm saying no letters are okay? It's not Yishlaim the Huadin. Everything in gold is a problem. It's not in Giyai. Why did the Gemara mention Hashem's name? So you would think Hashem's name of all things, maybe that should be in gold. Hashem's name, it's so special. I want to respect it. I'm going to write it. So it said even Hashem's name can't be in gold either. It says in Mesechus Seifrim, it says clearly Ein Kreis from Bezav. Okay, now we move on to discussing the klaf. And this is going to get a bit. The Rambam is going to be straightforward, but it's going to get a bit dicey, as we're going to see with the gersais and then this and that. Shleisha Eides Hein. So there's three forms of parchment: gvil, klaf, v'duchsustus. So these are three terms we're going to use, and now the Rambam is going to define what the three terms are. So Ketzad. So how do you get gvil, klaf, and duchsustus? So leikchen ura behema ura chaya. So you take the skin. Doesn't matter if it's a domesticated animal or not. Mavin and ser mimenu tchila. First you remove the hair, whatever process you have for that. Then you salt it. Then there's some kind of processing with flour. And then you use this afza, this resin from the gall or whatever. Whatever ingredient really that causes the skin to contract and get harder, to harden the skin. That's gvil. You took the whole entire hide and you did the process, the entire thing in one shot. That's the gvil. How do you get the klaf and the duchsustus? If after removing the hair you took the hide, and you sliced the whole thing in half, into two thin layers, which is something that the people who process parchment is something they do. So you sort of split it; it turns into two pieces of hide, an outer layer and an inner layer. One is thin, that's on the outside where the hair was, and one is thicker, that was on the inside touching the skin. So if you took those two, you did the salting and then the flour, and then you use the afza, whatever, the resin to harden it. So now here's where the gersa is, here's where it gets dicey. So I'm going to read the text I have in front of me. The outer one is called duchsustus, according to the text I have. And the inside is called the klaf. Now, in this Rambam right over here, there are actually competing neschayos. There are neschayos that say the opposite, that the one on the outside is the klaf, and the one on the inside is the duchsustus. We're going to talk about what the Alter Rebbe says in a moment. Let's just do halacha ches tes. Halacha l'meishem misinai sheyukaisen sefer Torah ala gvil. So why are we mentioning these three concepts? So halacha l'meishem misinai is that sefer Torah should be written on gvil, the complete hide. And you should write it on the outside of the hide where the skin was. The sheyukaisen not tefillin ala klaf, and tefillin should be written on klaf, which is according to what I just read, the inside layer. And in the inside layer, you should be writing on the side that was touching the inside, the flesh. And mezuzah should be written on the duchsustus, which is according to what we read here, the outer layer. And again, you're writing on the outermost side where the hair was. The klaf, and if you take the klaf and instead of writing on the inside, you wrote on the outside of the klaf, closer to the hair, I should cause the gevul b'duchsustus from kain basar, or on the other two, you wrote it on the basar side, pasal, then it's no good. Halacha tes, av b'shakachi halacha misinai. Even though that we said there's a specific division that sefer Torah is gvil and tefillin is klaf and mezuzah is duchsustus, but if you didn't keep to that and cause sefer Torah ala klaf, kosher. If you have the sefer Torah on klaf, it's okay. But number gvil, so why do we say the sefer Torah should be on the gvil? El lamayit haduchsustus. It was basic mainly to tell you don't use duchsustus. That shem kasav all of us say for possible. If you use duchsustus for the sefer Torah, then the outer, just the hair, then it's possible. But if you use the inner, the klaf or the gvil, then it's okay. And the same goes for the mezuzah, that mezuzah again, it's the klaf or the gvil, and not the duchsustus. Sorry, the mezuzah is supposed to be on the duchsustus. And in this case, you can write it on all three. It's not a problem. We just said it's ideal. It's more of a mitzvah to write on the duchsustus, but for the mezuzah, all three would be okay. So you look at the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Lamed Beis. The Alter Rebbe says halacha l'meishem misinai that tefillin are only written on klaf and not on duchsustus and not on gvil. V'imshina pasal, and if you change, it's pasal. Ein kaisvin ala klaf, ela b'mkoim basar. Okay, so far that's the same words as the Rambam. The klaf has to be mekayim basa. But what's klaf and what's the chsusta? So here the Alter Rebbe says that before, the whole thing as a whole is called gvil. When you split it in half, he says the outside is called the klaf and the inside is called the chsustas. So if the outside is called the klaf, why are we
the opposite?
The opposite. But the detail that the klaf should be mekayim habasar, the chsusta should be mekayim haser, that doesn't change. So you're saying the outside is the klaf, but you should write mekayim habasar, which is the inside of the outer layer, and that when you write in the chsustas, it should be mekayim haser, which means on the outside of the inner layer. That then doesn't change. Everyone has that gersa in the Gemara. But what the klaf and the chsustas is, and therefore which side, that changes. So why? It says mash'am shekreson al klaf mekayim basar. That's mekayim hayoser karev lavasar. It's not actually, it didn't touch the flesh because it's the inside of the outer layer. So it was really what was touching the chsustas. And the Alter Rebbe says gvilun shalanu she'ein chelkon haisam, our gvilun which we don't split. So yesh lam din klaf. Consider them to be klaf. V'kaison aleim tefillin b'tzad sheklapi habasar, and we write on the inner
So
side.
gvil is the inner layer, the middle layer.
Gvil is the entire thing.
Oh, the entire thing.
Yeah. So now the Rambam wrote when you write on gvil, you should write mekayim haser. You should write on the outer, so that would be literally where the hair goes. And then if you wrote, on the gvil mekayim basar, it's possible. But according to Alter Rebbe, no. Our gvil we treat it like as a din klaf. We just call the gvil klaf, and therefore we say that you don't write it on the outside where the hair was. You write it on the inside where the basar was. It says the fact that we're cleaning off the outer layer on top, that's not actually the process of splitting the gvil into klaf and the chsustas. Whatever gets removed, whatever outer layer gets removed, that's just a little bit to smooth it out, but it's not actually divided into two. Okay, it's a whole topic, whole subject. We're just touching on the concepts. Halacha yud. The hide itself, where does the skin itself come from? So we didn't mention which animal we're talking about. I hear that Rambam says that you don't write it on a tummy animal, an impure animal, or a bird, or any sort. But it could be from an animal, from a domesticated, not even a bird, if they're tar. They could even have died not through shchita. It's not necessary. However, you can't use a fish because it's just not pleasant. And even processing it, the Rambam says, doesn't remove something unpleasant about the fish skins, so you can't use it. Halacha Yud Aleph, gvil shel sefer Torah, klaf shel tefillin shel sefer Torah. So whether you're using gvil or using klaf, it has to be processed l'shma. If you didn't have in mind that this is specifically for the mitzvah, it's possible. And for that reason, if the guy did it, it's possible. Now, why can't you tell the guy what to think? Why can't the guy do something l'shma? Even though we told him it's the shma, we said, have in mind, this is what the purpose is. There's no. The guy is independent. He does it for his reasons. He's not doing it for the reasons of the person hiring him. Therefore, any act that needs an element of the shema, and so a guy puzzle, the guy is always disqualified. However, the mezuzah, the reason why we started off the halacha saying just gvil of sefer Torah or klaf of tefillin or sefer Torah is because mezuzah happens to be, doesn't need to be l'shma. Like if you look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, again in Siman Lamed Beis, that's where most of the halachas are about stam are. So the Alter Rebbe says, "Mi'ibder nachri yesh paislin." There are some who say it's possible. Who? The Rambam. Even if a yid standing there and telling him, he says just like a get. A get, we all agree that if a guy writes a get, it's possible. Even though the yid standing there and he says, "Write it l'shmoi v'l'shma," you have to have in mind it's for the husband. What? Because the guy does it for his own reasons, not listening. And Alter Rebbe adds, even if he says, I'm listening, yeah, I'm having it in mind, I'll do what you said. He's not on the outside, on the inside, he's not keeping to what he said. And if he tells you, yes, piv I'm not, no, doesn't help. Not Neman, doesn't have Neman, so you don't trust him. That's Shita. But then, Alter Rebbe says, if Yesh Machshirin, the other opinions, other Yishayim, the only opinion. Some say that if a Yid standing there and he tells them to do a Lishmai, it's not like a get. So by a get, what's the difference between a get and there? A get, you have to write the whole get Lishmai v'Lishma. that he's not going to listen to you for the whole get. But for the ibud, all you need really is for one moment. When you drop the hide into the sid, whatever it is that's going to sort of scrape it off, you just need to have the l'shmoi at that moment. And for that, he can listen. He can listen for one moment and listen to you. He says you shouldn't just stand there and tell him and he'll listen to you for that one moment. You should really l'saya k'tzas. You should really help him a little bit with the ibud. He says this is actually the custom, the practice in these lands, because it wasn't a Jewish profession. There weren't tanneries that were run by Jews in Europe, at least not mitzvah mechol makaymus. So. And he says you have to help him though with this. You have to help him at this point of the process. It doesn't help. You're going to come later and just make the ritzuas black. Doesn't count as ibud. We're talking about the real hardcore work to take the when you're tanning it. But the other though, even if he didn't help at all, if he just said while he was putting it in at that key moment, he said l'shmai. So kasha, as we said, that really that one moment he is able to keep in line. And if the yid puts it in l'shmai, then he says the Yid Kamama should walk away. He says if the Yid puts it in l'shmai, then he can just maniach asanachi b'vada. You can let the guy do the rest, and the inside l'saya he doesn't have to help him anymore. That's the story with ibud l'shma. Now we're up to halacha Yid Beis. Halacha l'meishim Sinai she'en kaisvin sefer Torah le'mezuzah ela b'sirtut. So you have a concept of sirtut, lines, and you're writing the letters under the lines. So it's lined, not lined paper, it's lined parchment. You have to write on the lines. Tefillin, in this case, the tefillin are the exception. They don't need sirtut because they're so boxed up and covered up. A mezuzah is just a scroll on your door. It doesn't even have to be in a container necessarily. Sefer Torah, you're reading. They're meant for reading, in a sense. Tefillin is not meant for reading. You're literally locking it in a box. So for that reason, sirtut seems to be associated with things that you read. If you're not going to read it, so it doesn't. Shakal Gerson Parshias Elu. You don't have to look inside while you're writing it. You can write it by heart because everyone knows these. You say these Parshias so much that it shouldn't be a problem. You should be able to write it. Sefer Torah, Sefer Torah, you can't even write one letter. And I assume even these Parshias, we don't make any exceptions. You have to be looking inside the source and then copying the letter into the Sefer Torah. Looking at the Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Rebbe says tefillin is not like mezuzah. Mezuzah needs sirtut. Every line. Just tefillin doesn't need sirtut, but the Alter Rebbe says it a bit differently. It only needs sirtut on the top line. Shita hal yaina. Because medivrei sefer midrabanan, it's not just a problem with reading, it's a problem with writing. You're not allowed to write 3 words of Torah without sirtut, as we're going to learn here today, the Alter Rebbe says. But all the other lines don't need sirtut because the top line is like sirtut for everything else. You shouldn't be machmer. You shouldn't go say, I'll be machmer. I'll put lines in the whole tefillin. Whoever's potter for something and does it anyway, it's called a hedget. But if you can't write straight, you need the lines simply to do a better job, so then that's a kelevan veyu, then it's a different story. Then you're not a hedget, then you're doing it for a good reason. And even if you could write straight, but it'll be extra straight, also not a hedget, because you're not doing it as a chumrah, it's a hider. The distinction between a chumrah and a hider. He says, call a potter and a dover, and you're doing your hedget, that's only if it's b'derech chumrah. And it's not a chumrah that's saving you from an isser. A chumrah that saves you from an isser, that the Alter Rebbe has a whole parentheses over here. But in this case over here, what's the point? Why are you doing it? It's not saving you from an isser. It's not a hiddur mitzvah. So what are you doing it for? It's serving no purpose. That's why you're called a hedget. He says every chumrah has to have some kind of purpose for it. And then he connects it to Hayesh Pasukah. If Sukkah is coming up at the Mikra Adin, Hayesh Pasukah B'Shasak Sham is a hedget. Because what are you gaining? What are you gaining by sitting in the rain? Obviously, that's a whole discussion. And this is another opinion that says you actually do have to have sirtut l'mayl, l'matum, and atstadim, and tefillin, and everywhere, because it's like any 3 words of a pasuk that you write needs to have sirtut, even if you can write without sirtut. But the ikar is kasvara harishayna, ba'afa became negel hachmer, but tefillin kasvara hachrayna. We are machmer here. We're being machmer because there's another opinion. We're being machmer to hold like the other opinion. That's okay. We're being machmer. Now, just to finish the rest off, halacha yud gimel sefer Torah from min yisarfu. So if an apikoros wrote them, you burn them. We had the similar in Hilchos Yisrael Torah. We learned about the shemus hakadashim. We had the same idea. Kasavan goy yisrael meshumar meiser ever yishai cotton. Harei elu psulin v'yaganzu. But if it's not a min, if it's a guy or a meshumad or a maser or a slave or a woman or a child, it's not, you don't burn it, but you have to be buried. It's not, you can't use it. It's possible. You have to actually be mechuyev in the mitzvah. So that gets rid of the guy and the avid isha and cotton. You have to believe in it. That excludes the mishuman and the moser. Nimtzu biyad min. What if you find a pair of tefillin a min has, and you do a mikasva? You don't know who wrote it though. You gunzu, you should also bury them. This is before you had seifrim. Today, if you found it by a min, I'm assuming you wouldn't assume that he wrote it. Not unless it's from a chves or reform. If you have reason to assume. But stam safras comes from sefer today. Nimtzu biyad goy kshed. If you find it with a guy, there's no chance. Not no chance, but it's highly unlikely the guy wrote it himself. So you can assume that a yid must have written it, and you can assume the chazak that it's a kasher. You shouldn't redeem it. You shouldn't pay more than the market price to get it from a guy, which you want to do because why does he have it? Well, the hargalais and the Gambam and the Gazlan. Otherwise, you're going to train them to steal more to get more money. We have the famous Maisa we quote about Sam Sapojnik, the guy who had it, and I don't know if he was trying to sell it, he just claimed, or he was trying to sell it, and they said, how do you have it? He said, I didn't steal it, I made it myself, and that's the joke, that he's the guy who made it himself. Sefer Torah Tefillin Mezuzah Shekatzon Agabi Ur Be'em V'Chai Oif HaTmein Agabi Ur She'en Mu'abaden Shekatzon Sefer Torah Tefillin Al Ur Shle'ibdu L'Shmon Harei Elu P'Sulin. He goes back to those halachas we said earlier and says if you went ahead, it was tamei, not a kosher animal, or you didn't do the ibud, you simply didn't process the skin, or it wasn't l'shma, it's possible. Halachat Azvav. Psul, and if you wrote without kavana, and you wrote the Hashem's name without intention, without the Hashem's name, that's possible. So therefore, the kavana is very important when you're writing Hashem's name. Even if the Yiddish king is asking how you're doing, you don't answer. Of course, if it's a Gaish king, we don't have tefillah, then you might assume he'll kill you, so that's a different story. Nefesh. But otherwise, just like tefillah, you wouldn't interrupt, so you wouldn't interrupt here. But if you're writing a few names, then you can interrupt between the shemus and answer, and then go back. If you're dipping the pen in right now for the ink, don't start and write the first word, the right Hashem's name, because you might have too much ink, it might ruin it. First write another letter and then write Hashem's name. If you forgot to write Hashem's name, you can actually write it between the lines. Possible. But if part of it is in the line, a part of it is off the line, then it's not okay. In any other word, if you forgot, then you can actually write part of it in the line and part of it going up. But this is only a sefer Torah. So this is tefillin for those. Even one letter can't be out of line. If you forgot a line, you have to just bury the whole thing and start over. If you scrape or you erase, you can write Hashem's name over and not a problem. If you're writing the parchment, you can't just flip it over on its face. You can either put something over it or you can fold it, but you can't put it just upside down. What if a sefer, here he mentions the sefer, what if the sefer produced it and he says, oh, actually, I didn't do it l'shma. It's possible. We don't believe him. He doesn't have the namanos to say that it's possible. But we trust him to take away the money that we paid him. So we don't pay him, but we say it's kosher. Why don't we believe him? Maybe he just wanted to make someone lose money, and he thought, he didn't think he's going to lose all his money. If he's going to lose all his money, he's putting the money on the line. No, he thought he's only going to not be paid for Hashem's name. So, but really, we don't pay him at all, and we ignore him. If he said it in a manner where it's clear that he will lose all the money, so then, since he loses all his money, so then, the Eiris aren't Lishma, so then everyone knows, even the Sefer would know he wouldn't be paid. You have to write it in the Ksav, the Hebrew Ksav Ashuri. The Sefer Torah could be written in Greek as well, and Medina, the Mishnah, or the Koine Shtaka, Yevanim, and Ha'elam, and the whatever Greek that was, we don't have, you can't do it. All three are in Ashuri. Make sure letters don't touch each other. You have to have empty space around around it from all four sides. If not, psula. And what's the test? The child. The child is the test. He tells you if it's good or not. Very careful that two letters aren't interchanged. Chav, final halacha, you can't write if there's a hole. But if the ink doesn't go through the hole, then it's not really a hole. You can write there, which is why you can write on the skin of a bird, even though the skin of a bird apparently has holes in it, but not holes the ink leaks through. If the hole came afterwards, if it's inside the space, inside the letter, not a problem. If it's in the actual ink until it broke it, if you take away the bottom and it's still a mini vav, let's say, then it's kosher. As long as it doesn't look like another letter, it doesn't look like a yud anymore. It doesn't start looking like a yud. And if you can't even look at it as a mini letter, then it's not okay.